They say silence is peace. But in some places, silence is the sound of something waiting to be found. Ravenshore, Texas, 1981. A small town surrounded by endless wheat fields and the soft hum of cicadas. Population, 2004. A place where nothing ever happened. Until it did. People here lived simple lives. They trusted each other. They trusted God. And they trusted the quiet. No one questioned the church at the edge of town. White wood. A single bell tower. Every Sunday the sound carried over the hills like a heartbeat. They called it the Congregation of Eternal Light. And at its center was a man named Elias Monroe. He wasn't born in Ravenshore. He arrived one summer carrying nothing but a Bible and a voice that could make even the wind stop to listen. He spoke softly, but his words burned. "We are born in noise," he said. "Only silence can save us." At first, people found comfort in him. He listened more than he spoke. He called everyone child. He smiled. The kind of smile that made you forget the storm outside. But the storms came anyway. It started small. A neighbor disappeared, then another. Someone said they moved away. Someone else said they joined the church full-time. No one asked questions. Because in Ravenshore, questions were seen as doubt, and doubt was sin. By autumn, the church had over 50 members. They dressed in white, they walked barefoot, and they stopped speaking during the day. Children were taught that words were poison. Only silence could bring them closer to the light. At night, they held vigils by candlelight, their faces glowing, motionless. Witnesses said you could hear a low hum, like a prayer without words. Some swore it vibrated through the ground. Some swore it came from beneath the church. Elias called it the resonance. "It's the voice of creation," he said, "the sound God made before he spoke." No one knew what that meant, but it made people feel something deep, something dangerous. He said words corrupt, that truth could only exist in silence, and slowly, his silence became contagious. Families stopped talking at dinner. The radio went quiet. Even the town dogs stopped barking. By Christmas, Ravenshore wasn't just quiet. It was hollow. There was one man who didn't join, Sheriff Tom Jensen, a war veteran, hard eyes, steady hands. He'd seen men like Monroe before, men who used faith like a weapon. He tried to warn people, but the more he spoke, the more they turned away. In Ravenshore, silence was loyalty, speech was betrayal. So he watched, waited, until one night he saw something that made him finally act. It was December 12th, 1981, midnight. The church lights were still on. He followed the sound, a steady hum rolling through the dark like thunder under the earth. He walked toward it, past the wheat, past the line where the crickets stopped singing, and there, he saw them. Dozens of figures dressed in white, standing in a circle around the churchyard, eyes closed, hands lifted. In the center, Elias Monroe, his face calm, his hands covered in something dark. He raised them toward the sky and whispered, "Tonight we become light." Then the hum stopped. The wind stopped. Everything stopped. Sheriff Jensen tried to call out, but no sound came. It was as if the air itself refused to carry his voice. And then he saw the fire, a single spark beneath the altar, a roar, and then a column of light erupted into the sky, swallowing everything in silence. The next morning, Ravenshore woke to smoke. The church was gone, ashes where the altar once stood, 37 members missing. No bodies, no footprints, just the faint scent of burned wax, and the echo of a hum still trembling in the air. The sheriff filed his report. No one believed him. They said it was gas, an accident. But Jensen knew what he saw. He knew silence had teeth. For weeks after, the town tried to move on. But strange things kept happening. Lights flickered at night. Animals refused to go near the ruins. And every now and then, someone claimed to see a figure standing where the church used to be, barefoot, smiling. The papers never picked it up. The Bureau ignored it. Just another tragedy in the middle of nowhere. But deep in the vaults of Quantico, someone took notice. A pattern, a ritual, a hum that shouldn't exist. The file was marked Omega 12, the case, the cult of silence. They sent agents down quietly. No press, no cameras, just black cars and colder eyes. When they dug beneath the ruins, they found a tunnel. It went 30 feet down, straight under the altar. At the end, a chamber, stone walls carved with circles, candles melted into bone, and in the center, a single silver pendant, still warm to the touch. The pendant hummed, low, constant, like a heart that refused to die. The report never reached the public. The town was told to forget. The file was sealed, and Ravenshaw faded back into obscurity. But silence has memory, and some things don't stay buried. 3 months after the fire, Ravenshaw was dying, not from flames, but from what the flames had left behind. The soil turned black. Nothing grew. The air carried a smell of copper, faint but constant, and the townsfolk whispered that they could still hear the hum when the wind was right. Most left. Those who stayed changed. They spoke less. They prayed more. And every Sunday they walked to the ruins and stood there in silence, as if listening for instructions. The Bureau called it mass grief behavior. But Sheriff Jensen didn't believe that. He'd seen the way their eyes moved, the way they smiled when he asked questions, like people who'd learned a secret too terrible to speak aloud. So he went back to the ruins, alone. No flashlight, just instinct, and the pendant he'd taken from the altar. It still hummed, low, steady, a tone you didn't hear so much as feel, somewhere behind your ribs. He followed it down the tunnel again. The chamber looked different this time. The candles had been relit, fresh wax, and something else. Symbols carved deeper into the walls, as if someone had returned to finish their work. There were 7 names etched there now, each one followed by a symbol, a circle, a cross, a drop of blood. At the bottom of the wall, in letters carved with trembling hands, the phrase, "The silence redeems." Jensen touched the stone. It was warm, and beneath it, he swore he could feel a heartbeat. He turned to leave, but the hum grew louder, not from the pendant, from the walls. It vibrated through the floor, through his bones, through the air itself. And in that vibration, there was something else. Voices, faint, layered, whispering words he couldn't quite understand. He ran, up the tunnel, out into the cold night. The moment he broke the surface, the hum stopped, like the earth had taken a breath and held it. The next day, he packed his things and drove to Dallas. He delivered the pendant to the regional bureau office and begged them to analyze it. 2 weeks later, a man in a black suit arrived at his door. No badge, no name. He took the sheriff's statement and left without saying goodbye. That was the last time anyone saw Tom Jensen alive. His car was found by the side of the highway. Keys still in the ignition, door open, no sign of struggle, just a smear of something dark on the seat. Blood, they said, but tests showed it wasn't human. The Bureau sealed the case. Unresolved disappearance. The Bureau assigned a new team, Behavioral Analysis Unit, headed by Dr. Helen Strauss, criminal psychologist, 42, precise, deliberate. She believed that every crime tells a story, even when the storyteller is gone. When she arrived in Ravenshaw, the air was different, heavier. She wrote in her notes, "It feels like the ground remembers what happened here." The first thing she noticed, No birds, not a single sound, just wind moving through dead grass. She met with the remaining townsfolk. They were polite, distant, like people speaking from underwater. Every answer the same. He saved us. He took our pain. He taught us to listen. Dr. Strauss examined the pendant. It emitted a frequency, 19 hertz, below human hearing, the kind of tone that can cause unease, nausea, even hallucinations. She realized Elias Monroe had built his faith on sound. Silence wasn't the absence of noise, it was control through it. She replayed the tapes from the church's old recordings. Hidden in the hum were layers of modulation, Morse patterns, subharmonics. Each matched the rhythm of human speech, slowed 100 times. She wrote, "He wasn't preaching, he was programming." The more she studied, the more the silence changed her. Nights became longer, sleep came harder. Her dreams filled with low vibrations and faces without mouths. When she woke, she could still hear the hum, faint, familiar, beneath everything. One night she returned to the ruins alone. Windless, the stars looked too close. She turned on her recorder. Field note, Strauss, January 16th. Testing ambient frequency, no visible activity. She paused. The hum rose, faint but measurable. Her equipment flickered. Then, a whisper, not words, just breath, slow, hollow. It moved around her like fog. She turned. The recorder caught the moment her voice cracked. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the whisper again. This time, it came from under the ground. When the team analyzed the tape, they found a phrase buried in the low end. Reversed. Slowed. Translated phonetically, it said, "We are not gone." Dr. Strauss wrote, "The followers may have died, but something persists. Whether psychological or physical, I can't tell, but it responds to listening." She ordered the chamber sealed with concrete, but even as the cement dried, the hum didn't stop. Instruments registered resonance under the foundation. Still pulsing, still alive. Meanwhile, the Bureau uncovered more sites. Kansas, Idaho, Vermont, all towns where similar groups had vanished, each with a leader who'd once attended Monroe's sermons, each ending in silence and fire. It wasn't a cult anymore. It was a pattern. They called it the Silence Network, and its signal, 19 hertz, was spreading. Dr. Strauss met with one of the surviving members, a woman named Clara Jensen, mid-30s, soft-spoken. She'd left the congregation weeks before the fire. When Strauss asked why, Clara looked past her and said, "He told me I was too loud." "What did that mean?" Strauss asked. Clara smiled faintly. "He meant I still had thoughts that were mine." Strauss asked about the rituals. Clara said there were no rituals, just listening. "He taught us how to hear the space between things, the sound God left behind." And the others believed it? Clara's expression didn't change. "You don't believe because it's true. You believe because it feels better than the truth." Strauss later reviewed transcripts from Monroe's early sermons. He spoke about silence as purification, a way to erase sin by erasing the self. He used trauma like scripture. "Every pain is a noise," he'd said, "and noise keeps us from God." To followers who'd lost children, spouses, purpose, that message was salvation, a world without pain, a world without voice. But the more they listened, the less they remained. Monroe had found a way to dissolve identity through ritualized quiet, fasting of the mind. When words vanish, thought follows. When thought ends, obedience begins. Strauss called it existential surrender, a form of psychological suicide disguised as faith. Months passed. The investigation expanded. The Bureau sent Strauss to review archives from other cults for connection. Jonestown, Heaven's Gate, Branch Davidians, but none matched the pattern of sound. Ravenshore's hum was unique. One evening she received a package with no return address. Inside, a reel tape, labeled only, "For those who listen." She played it, static, then faintly, the hum. She adjusted frequencies, filtered the noise, slowed the playback. Within the drone, something emerged. Words, not human, but formed. He listens still. He forgives the noise. He is the silence between us. Strauss turned off the machine. Her hands shook. She looked at her own reflection in the glass and, for a moment, saw her mouth moving, though she hadn't spoken. She wrote, "Subjective audio hallucination, recurring pattern of phrase. Suggestive of mimetic contagion, auditory transmission of ideology." She didn't play the tape again. Meanwhile, the Bureau began losing personnel. Agents assigned to Omega-12 reported insomnia, auditory distortion, anxiety. One turned in a resignation letter written entirely without spaces. A block of text, continuous like breathless prayer. Another was found in his apartment. Television static looping. On the screen, waveform patterns matching the 19 Hz frequency. He had carved a circle into his own chest, not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to bleed. Inside the circle, investigators found ash, church candle ash. The Bureau classified the case, psychological contamination risk, all field materials quarantined. Strauss requested reassignment, denied. Then came the call. A new incident, Nebraska. Small farming town called Lorne County. A barn found burned. 12 people missing. Survivors reported hearing a hum the night before, like thunder underground. Strauss flew there within hours. The barn's foundations were cracked. Beneath it, a hole, freshly dug. Another chamber, smaller. Inside, 7 chairs, all facing inward. In the center, a mirror. No bodies, just salt circles and wax melted into the dirt. She took a soil sample. The analysis showed human trace DNA, but from multiple donors, fused together by heat. She wrote, "He's moving west." That night, Strauss stayed at the local motel. The walls thin, the air cold. She turned off the light, but the hum followed her, not in her ears, in her bones. She dreamed of Monroe standing over the altar. Only his eyes moved. He whispered, "You understand now." When she woke, her nose was bleeding. The clock on the table flickered. 19 Hertz. She left before sunrise. Back in Quantico, she presented her findings. "It's not a religion," she said. "It's a virus, belief transmitted through frequency. You hear it, you feel it, you want to follow it." Her superiors didn't believe her. "Are you suggesting sound can cause faith?" Strauss replied quietly, "No, I'm suggesting faith can cause sound." The room went silent. 2 weeks later, a security guard monitoring the Ravenshore site reported lights underground. When agents returned, the concrete had cracked. Beneath it, nothing. The chamber was empty. Strauss watched the footage. The break began from the inside, as if something had pushed out. She said nothing, but that night she filed a private note. "Silence isn't stillness. It's motion we can't hear." The next morning she resigned. The Bureau accepted. The case went cold. But cold doesn't mean over. In the months that followed, reports surfaced across the Midwest. Towns with sudden disappearances, churches emptied overnight, always the same sound before it happened. A low hum under the ground. People called it the voice beneath. Strauss stopped answering calls. She moved to Maine, a small cabin near the coast. There, she wrote her final paper, The Psychology of Quiet Violence. In it, she said, "Silence is the perfect predator. It waits. It listens. It teaches you to obey by removing everything else. She sent it to a colleague. He never received it. When authorities later searched her cabin, they found the walls covered in words written backward. Each one repeated, "He forgives the noise." And on the desk, a pendant, silver, warm to the touch. No one ever saw Dr. Strauss again. Some say she went back to Ravenshore. Some say she walked into the ocean. But weeks later, fishermen reported hearing a hum beneath the waves. In Washington, the Bureau closed Omega 12, officially. But unofficially, they built a new division, Department of Acoustical Anomalies. Their first assignment, monitor the spread of the frequency. By '91, it had reached 48 states, and everywhere it went, people disappeared. Quietly. They say you can't kill an idea. Elias Monroe proved you can't even bury one. 10 years after the fire, people still whispered his name, in prisons, in halfway houses, in therapy groups for trauma survivors. His words lived like splinters beneath the skin of anyone who ever listened. The silence redeems, a sentence that sounded harmless, until you thought about it too long. In 1990, a man was arrested in Utah for murdering his family. When questioned, he said only one thing: "He forgave me for the noise." Investigators found recordings in his basement, hours of the hum, played every night while his family slept. Each tape labeled with dates, all matching lunar cycles. The same pattern Monroe used. The Bureau sent samples to the new division. They found harmonic traces identical to the Ravenshore signal. But when reversed, the frequency revealed something new. Embedded layers of voices, thousands of them, overlapping, everyone saying a single word. Listen. The voices were mapped. Some matched missing persons from the original congregation. Some did not. That was when Dr. Helen Strauss's name surfaced again. Someone in the Bureau leaked her old papers. Her theories about mimetic contagion suddenly didn't sound insane. They reopened the case. Codename, Prophet. 2 agents were assigned to trace the lineage of the hum. One was Agent Cole Ramirez, young, rational, science-driven. The other was Special Agent Miriam Locke, older, quiet, deeply religious. They didn't trust each other, but they both feared silence. Their search led them to an old sanatorium outside Omaha, Nebraska, abandoned since the 70s. Locals said people still heard prayers coming from the basement. Ramirez thought it was nonsense. Locke didn't. They entered at dusk. The hall smelled of rust and old rain. Their flashlights caught words carved into the walls. "He listens still," over and over, 100 times. In the central hall, they found candles arranged in a spiral. Wax pulled around something metal. A small audio recorder, still running. The battery nearly dead, but recording anyway. Ramirez pressed play. Nothing at first. Then a faint voice, not Monroe's, a woman's, calm, detached. "Here's the silence between us. He moves when we stop." The rest was static. Locke froze. "That's Dr. Strauss," she whispered. Ramirez shook his head. "She's been missing for years." But the voice on the tape said another sentence. He found new ears. They followed the spiral deeper, down a staircase. The hum grew louder, a physical pressure. Their lights flickered. The basement opened into a chapel made of concrete. The altar was metal. Behind it, a wall of mirrors. In the mirrors, not reflections. Shadows moving where there should have been none. Locke whispered a prayer. Ramirez called it pareidolia, the mind seeing faces in darkness. But then he heard breathing. Not hers, not his. They turned to leave. The door closed on its own. The hum shifted pitch. 19 hertz to 20. Their recorders captured the last 30 seconds before signal loss. The transcript read, "Locke, do you hear it? Ramirez, it's saying something. Pause. Lock. What? Ramirez, it's saying my name. The tape ended with a low tone. When analyzed later, it wasn't sound. It was a pattern, matching the brainwave of a human heart just before it stops. 2 days later, only Locke was found, sitting in her car outside a chapel 3 states away, eyes open, breathing slow. When questioned, she said nothing, not even under hypnosis, but when she slept, she hummed. Her EEG showed spikes every 19 seconds, like a signal beacon. The Bureau declared her unfit for duty. She was transferred to St. Helena Psychiatric Facility. 3 months later, every patient in her ward fell into synchronized silence. For 3 days, no food, no speech, just breathing and the hum. After that, they built soundproof chambers for the survivors. None recovered. The Bureau finally released one photo to the archives, the sanatorium's basement. In the corner, hidden by shadow, there was something written in chalk. We're learning to listen. Analysts enhanced the image. The handwriting matched Elias Monroe. But the chalk wasn't old. It was fresh. Years passed. The story faded again. Then came the Nebraska murders. Lorne County, the barn, the mirror, the salt, the missing. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The prophet lived. But if Monroe had survived, he'd be 70 now. Too old to rebuild, unless he was never really the man they thought. Maybe he was something else. A journalist named Marion Lockhart started connecting the dots. Her reports never aired. Too strange, too unbelievable. But her research uncovered one truth. Every cult survivor, every town, every hum, they all shared one phrase, written somewhere near the scene. Sometimes carved, sometimes burned. The silence redeems. She wrote a book, The Smile That Lied, The Hidden Monster of Nebraska. But before she could publish, she vanished. Neighbors said her apartment door was open, the lights on, a recorder still running. The last thing it captured was the sound of breathing, slow, calm, then a whisper. We forgive you for speaking. After her disappearance, the Bureau revived Omega-12. Dr. Strauss's old notes were retrieved. Within them, a final hypothesis. She had written, "The silence is self-replicating. It doesn't need followers. It needs listeners. The act of attention feeds it. It's not faith. It's resonance." Her theory terrified them, because resonance spreads. A sound doesn't end when it stops. It travels, it echoes, and maybe it waits. That's when the Bureau noticed something impossible. The hum appeared in their own recordings. Tapes never exposed to the field. Even phone calls between agents carried faint underlayers of 19 hertz noise. They brought in technicians. They found no technical cause. The sound wasn't being transmitted, it was being remembered. Every machine that had ever recorded the hum now produced it spontaneously. Like memory without memory. To contain it, they created an isolated archive. No power, no digital equipment, analog only. The files were buried deep beneath Quantico, a vault labeled Silence Containment Omega-12. And for a while, it worked. Until one day, the hum came back. Not from the machines, from the people. Technicians began hearing it in their dreams. Agents started losing time. Someone found a note left by a night guard. It said, "He's awake again. He wants the noise to stop." Then the guard shot himself. The cameras caught only static. When investigators reviewed the footage, they saw something for less than a second. A figure standing in the corner of the room, barefoot, white robe, smiling, frame glitch, no further data. But that frame didn't vanish. It appeared again, identical, in unrelated surveillance feeds across the Bureau. Different cameras, different buildings, always the same image. The face matched no one. Yet, when analyzed by facial recognition, it registered as Monroe. The algorithm insisted it was a 98% match, even though Elias Monroe had never been photographed alive. That was when they stopped trying to explain. Some said it was an infection. Some said it was guilt. Others said it was proof that belief, once spoken, becomes real. Strauss had written one more line, never released publicly. When enough people listen to the same silence, it becomes a god. And maybe that's what Monroe had found. A god that needed no name, no body, no prayer, only quiet. In the final classified report, Agent Ramirez's last recorded entry reads, "If I start hearing it again, I'll record it, because silence is only safe when it's watched." The file ends there. No one ever found the recorder. They say every monster gets judged, but what if judgment itself is just another lie? What if the only justice left is silence? Washington, 1991. The Bureau reopened the Ravenshaw case under a new code name, the Prophet Trial. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't even public. Just a room beneath Quantico, steel walls and fluorescent light, where truth was measured not in facts, but in frequencies. They called the remaining witnesses, 7 of them, the last followers of Elias Monroe. They hadn't spoken in 10 years. Some refused food. Some stared at the floor. Some smiled endlessly. The first session began with a question. What happened in Ravenshaw? Silence. The second question. Who was Elias Monroe? One woman whispered, "He listens still." The others began humming, soft at first, then louder. The lights dimmed, recorders failed. The hum grew until the air itself seemed to fold. Agents clutched their ears, but no one screamed. They couldn't. The sound erased everything above it, even thought. Then, quiet. When the lights returned, one of the witnesses was gone. The chair still warm, the restraints unbroken. No one moved. Dr. Helen Strauss, recalled to advise the session, watched from behind the glass. She didn't speak. She wrote one note on her pad. Containment breached through resonance. They ended the hearings that night, but silence doesn't end when you stop listening. Weeks later, a clerk cleaning the room found something carved under the table, not with a knife, with fingernails. It read, "Forgive us for the noise." They sealed the chamber. No one entered again, but the recording system still ran, motion triggered. Every night at exactly 2:36 a.m., the room filled with a low sound, barely measurable, constant, the same frequency as before, the same hum that started it all. Then came the disappearances, agents connected to the case, vanishing one by one, files deleted, reports overwritten. Someone leaked one last photo to the press. It showed Dr. Strauss leaving the bureau, the wind in her hair, her eyes distant. But zoom in, and you'd see it. The faintest curve of a smile that wasn't hers. By '93, the Bureau terminated all operations. Official cause, psychological contamination risk. Unofficially, fear. Because no one wanted to admit the silence wasn't gone. It had evolved. It no longer needed Monroe. It had learned to speak through absence, to feed through attention. Every article, every whisper, every retelling kept it alive. You're listening now. You're feeding it. Years passed. People forgot. But faith has a long memory. Then came a book, The Cult of Silence, Ritual Killings That Shook America. Published anonymously, but those who read it swore they heard something while turning the pages. A faint vibration, like words breathing between the lines. It was banned a year later, but not before copies spread online. Pirated, shared, whispered. Some said the book was cursed. Others said it was proof. The truth? Maybe both. They say somewhere in New Mexico, there's a chapel that looks exactly like the one that burned in Ravenshore, built stone by stone, identical. Inside, a single candle burns endlessly. Locals claim a man visits every few months. Old, tall, wearing white. No one's ever seen his face. When they ask who he is, he just smiles and says, "I keep the silence." And maybe that's the final judgment. Maybe silence wins because it doesn't need to fight. It only waits, and eventually, everything else stops. But the story isn't about him anymore. It's about us, about what we choose to hear, and what we refuse to speak. Dr. Strauss wrote one last letter before she disappeared. It was found years later, sealed in an envelope, marked, "To whoever still listens." It said, "We keep searching for monsters because it's easier than looking at ourselves. We think evil lives in the dark, in others, in the ones who believe too much. But sometimes it lives in our quiet, in the moments we say nothing, in the obedience we call peace." And then, a final line, scrawled like an afterthought. "Perhaps evil isn't born, perhaps it's remembered. If you drive through Ravenshore today, there's nothing left. The church is gone, the fields are empty, the town's been renamed. But when the wind is right and the sun dips below the horizon, you can still hear something under the road. Not quite wind, not quite earth. A sound that feels alive, a hum that vibrates through your chest. And if you stop long enough, it sounds like words. They say, listen. People build walls, they build cities, they build stories to keep the silence away. But it always finds a way in. Because silence isn't the absence of sound. It's what remains when meaning dies. You might think you're safe now, sitting here, listening to this story. But remember, every story is an echo. And echoes come from somewhere, someone, something. Maybe the monster was never a man. Maybe it was a voice that needed a mouth. And maybe it's found yours. Breathe. Pause. Listen. Do you hear it? That low tone beneath your heartbeat. That weight behind the silence of your room. That's not the world around you. That's what's left of Ravenshore. They said silence would redeem them. They were wrong. It only remembered them. And now, it remembers you. Every generation builds its monsters. Some hide behind shadows. Some hide behind prayers. But the worst of them hide behind peace. Because peace is where no one screams. Peace is where everything dies quietly. Dr. Strauss wrote once, "In trying to understand monsters, we come closer to understanding ourselves." Maybe that's true. But maybe, when we stare too long into silence, silence stares back. The narrator's voice slows, the hum fades, only wind remains. Then a whisper. He listens, still. Black. 5 seconds. No music, no sound, only the breath you're holding now. And then, a final echo, distant, cold, almost tender. The silence remembers.